I've got a lot of respect for wrestlers, not just because of what they do day in, day out, but how they can take real-life situations that have probably created a lot of conflict and turn them into compelling stories. Imagine you had to work with Steve from accounts after he had slept with your significant other. I would guess you'd rather punch Stevie Boy in the face. Much like all walks of life though, there are some things that go too far and are so tightly wound that you want to squash them as quickly as possible, as opposed to put them in front of a TV camera. I guess in some respect that's a shame, because who knows what gold we would have received, but still, people's mental health has to come first. I'm Simon from WhatCulture. Remember to subscribe, and this is 10 real-life feuds that were too hot for TV. Number 10, Randy Orton versus Ken Kennedy. Randy Orton has quite the history. Aside from his wrestling achievements, there's also been plenty of stories, backstage ribs, pranks and blow-ups over the years that were made into news headlines around the world. One of his most infamous spats came in 2009 when Orton came up against Ken Kennedy. Just on his way back after a shoulder injury, Kennedy was put in a 10-man tag match against a team featuring Randy on the 25th of May 2009 episode of Raw. The bout saw the Viper land awkwardly after taking a back body drop from Kennedy, and somehow it was this that kinda led to the end of Ken's entire WWE career. Since then, Kennedy has given plenty of shoot interviews saying Orton outright complained to Vince McMahon that he was unsafe. Randy went as far as to try and convince John Cena about this, assuming that 2 stars of that level would be enough to get the boss to let Ken go. Guess it worked. There's plenty to suggest that Orton and Kennedy could have had a pretty good on-screen rivalry, but this was it for Ken, and we've never seen him back in the WWE since. There's probably still some bad blood there too. Number 9, Bret Hart versus Ric Flair. Bret Hart and Ric Flair are considered as 2 of the best in-ring workers ever. For that reason alone, you'd think they'd always have been friends, but over the years they haven't gone on that well. It started, I think, when the Hitman argued that all of Flair's matches were the same and lacked a certain amount of creativity. I can see why someone would get upset by such a remark. Rick fired back by saying that Bret's drawing ability and main event staying power were overstated at best, and he was lucky to have the run he did. From here, some proper animosity developed between them both, as various shots were fired as and when they fancied it. Even if you can argue there's some truth in both statements, it doesn't matter really. Each have legions of fans who will fight their cause till the end, and it's probably this spat which meant we never saw them have a proper on-camera feud. The closest they ever came was the 2014 Natalya vs. Charlotte mini-program in NXT, as both men stood in their respective corners. The pair did meet in a WWF ring on a handful of occasions in 1992, most notably when Bret won his first WWF championship, but an actual program was never on the cards. Flair was out the company in 93 and back in WCW, whereas Hart continued to cement his legacy under one Vincent Kennedy McMahon. Oh boy. Number 8, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Jeff Jarrett. You can create heat in pro wrestling really easily. It only ever takes one incident to spark something into life, as proven when Steve Austin got super mad at Jeff Jarrett within a heartbeat. The story goes that while working for Jerry Jarrett's USWA territory, Austin was staring at his paycheck before Jerry walked by and said, "It ain't gonna get bigger by staring at it." He then laughed at Steve. From that point on, the Rattlesnake marked him as an asshole. Fast forward to 1998 and Austin was the biggest star in the wrestling business. He needed bad guys to work against though, and the office decided Jeff Jarrett could fit that role. That would have been huge for Jeff given how hot Stone Cold was at the time, but as soon as his name was mentioned to the Bionic Redneck, he refused to work with him. All seemingly coming from the fact his dad had shunned him in the USWA. The end result of all these talks was a simple stunner on one episode of Raw. Austin then mocked Jarrett's strut. We never got any kind of longer feud, and it goes to show. Always watch what you say to people, even those a few rungs down the ladder, because you just never know. Number 7, Chris Jericho versus Brock Lesnar. If Jericho had it his way, this would likely happen in AEW of all places, but for now, let's just assume that will never take place, especially given the current state of WWE. Away from the cameras though, it's been far more close to becoming a reality than you may think. Way back in 2016, Jericho got right in Lesnar's face during a backstage altercation after Brock's match with Randy at SummerSlam. Given that the former UFC champ had pounded Orton's head into a bloody mess, Y2J wanted to know how legit this was. When no one told him, he assumed Lesnar must have gone into business for himself, so went to sort it out, and yes, that is the worst plan ever. The two got in each other's faces, and whereas Brock was just chuckling in Jericho's direction, Chris was thinking about biting off Lesnar's nose. That was legit as well. This was his plan should they have actually come to blows. Thankfully, Vince McMahon stepped in to calm things down, and by now you'd imagine neither care. Got too much going on. It was a huge story at the time, however, and very well could have become something in front of an audience if things had lined up. They haven't yet. This could be one you don't want to count out too fast. Number 6, Vince McMahon versus the Ultimate Warrior. That sounds dumb on paper, but let's face it, McMahon feuded with everyone else he fell out with in real life, so why not the Warrior before his tragic passing a few years ago? I don't think anyone would have been that surprised. Apart from the ring, the two did battle everywhere, from the backstage area to courtrooms, and the amount of lawsuits that kept cropping up was crazy. There was a ton throughout the 90s and 2000s, ranging from breach of contract to character defamation. Warrior would sue Vince only for Vince to retaliate, and that got worse when WWE released the Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior DVD. The bad blood between them escalated, and we all assumed that Warrior was done with the company in any capacity. Time does heal all wounds though, because the Ultimate One was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2014, mostly thanks to Triple H extending the olive branch. As mentioned, he died a few days later, leaving quite the legacy behind. It meant that Warrior's name would never be added to a list that included Stone Cold, The Rock, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, all who did go on to whip McMahon's ass in an actual ring. Maybe it was for the best. Number 5, Sunny versus Sable. Sable was the first WWE wrestler to appear in Playboy. You never imagine it these days, but it caused a huge splash in the late 90s and made Sable the star she would become. If Sunny had accepted the same offer years prior, however, their history books would tell a different story. For one reason or another, Sunny turned it down, and that was that. Sable certainly benefited from it, as the cover issue sold a record number of copies, and this only set fire to a feud that had been going on behind the scenes between her and Sunny. The two women had incredible heat with each other when competing for the company's top female spot. In doing so, both women also seemed to piss off everyone else backstage, whether it was Sable's attitude or Sunny's, well, locker room performances we'll go with. Throw in some scraps with Marlena and later Chyna, and the women's scene in the mid to late 90s was as competitive as ever before. The problem was it was all happening away from TV. While Sable eventually transitioned into an in-ring performer, Sunny did not. This and the fact they both had a legitimate disdain for one another prevented the WWE from capitalizing on what would have been an incredibly hot feud, and one that fans would have been interested to see. I mean, even though evening gown matches haven't aged that well at all, Sable vs Luna and Sable vs Jacqueline were incredibly popular programs. Imagine if we could have put Sunny in there instead. Number 4, Stephanie McMahon versus CHYNA. CHYNA smashed women's wrestling when she arrived in 1997. Instantly standing apart from the likes of the two women we were just talking about, CHYNA looked like she could kick your ass no matter what your gender. She was dubbed the ninth wonder of the world, and her career reached incredible heights, including becoming Intercontinental Champion. That will probably never happen again. CHYNA did all of this alongside her then boyfriend Triple H, and it was this relationship that would ultimately be her undoing. Why? Because at some point the game started seeing Stephanie McMahon, the daughter of the boss. At first, just an on-air love affair, Triple H and Stephanie actually fell for each other before long, which left CHYNA out in the cold. Around the same time, her contract came up for renewal, and after asking for a reported $1 million guaranteed, it was not re-signed. It meant CHYNA became a very unfortunate victim in the love triangle that was always going to have some casualties. She lost her man, and she lost her job. Given how hot the McMahon-Helmsley era was, there was every chance CHYNA could have fitted into that somehow, especially as the reality of the situation would have made for an astonishing story. It never got to that point, and CHYNA still seemed quite upset about it before her untimely passing in 2016. She was only 46. Number 3, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Hulk Hogan. Remember WrestleMania 18? Of course you do. It was when Icon took on Icon as Hulk Hogan and The Rock battled it out in Canada. If WWE had gone with their preferred choice though, it would have been one Steve Austin stepping into that slot instead. So why didn't this happen? Simple. Stone Cold had shot it down. Worried about Hogan's politicking or the fact that Hulk would try and turn the whole thing into the Hulkster show, he passed on the idea, and fair play to Austin, he was 100% right. That is exactly what happened. How far this concept got we don't know, but it was very quickly turned into Hogan vs. The Rock, which is considered a classic. Not so much if you turn the sound off, but that's why wrestling is great. There was more to all this as well, as Steve already had history with Hogan, even if it wasn't in a feud. Back in the mid-90s, when Austin was rising through the WCW ranks, he found his push cut short as soon as Hogan arrived in the company. Something must have happened as soon Steve was cutting controversial anti-Hulk promos in ECW, and much like his past with the Jarretts, he never forgot about it. Furthermore, isn't there something to the fact that as soon as Hogan was back in the fold and having a championship run in 2002, Austin quit? I think not. So while backstage their rivalry wasn't the most severe in existence, it was real and did stop them from pasting it onto a show. Let's face it too, what would have been better? The two most influential wrestlers in history squaring off. That truly would have been something. Number 2, Hulk Hogan versus Bret Hart. Following on from this, we get to Hogan versus Bret. Pitched at one point in time as a dream match in its own right, we were meant to get this back in 1993 as Vince McMahon had lined up Hulk versus the Hitman for SummerSlam. Never happened. As the Hitman would say in his book, he remembers being promised a title shot against Hogan in the summer, only for Hogan to go out of his way to get the whole thing pulled. Deciding that Bret was too small to go up against the might of the Hulkster, Hogan agreed to just drop his title to Yokozuna at the King of the Ring pay-per-view instead, ending any hopes of this happening. Hart even said that a photo shoot was all ready and good to go before the whole idea came crumbling down. Hart was so mad when he heard the news he confronted Hogan, who then denied it all. He never said any of that stuff. It could have been that McMahon had said it as an excuse to change direction, but there was a lot of on-screen evidence that this was certainly the plan at one point. The real-life heat was mega after that, and that's why we never saw a proper Hart versus Hogan run. Sucks really, would have been damn good. That's wrestling politics. Number 1, Shawn Michaels versus The Rock. When you think about it, it's mad we never saw The Rock versus Shawn Michaels in any sense. Numerous reports over the years have suggested it was because the two never got along, although most of that was on the side of Rocky. He had decided Michaels was bad news even before he broke into the wrestling business and never changed his mind. As the story goes, sometime around the mid-80s while Shawn was working for Leah Maivia, who was The Rock's grandma, a young Heartbreak Kid said something derogatory to her, and that was that. You don't insult the Great One's family. Throw in that Michaels had a pretty bad reputation when Rock joined the WWE in 1996, and there's enough to go on that he just wanted to keep his distance. While he never went into much detail, the now Hollywood superstar did admit to not having any interest in working with Michaels a few years ago during an interview for WWE.com. Ever since, the two have been seen being perfectly pleasant to each other backstage, but that doesn't mean anything. Maybe back in the day they just wanted to slap the crap out of each other. Why else not at least give this feud a go? You ain't ever getting it now though, so your best bet is to just do it in WWE 2K19. Know of any other real life feuds that were too hot for TV? Make sure you let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then head over to WhatCulture.com and read yourself some articles, and follow WhatCulture on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. My name is Simon from WhatCulture, and I will talk to you again soon.